Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first episode of Marvel Mania. Yeah, I'm starting a podcast. To be clear, this isn't the first podcast that I guess, tried to start with this channel. A little bit before the channel even started, actually, I decided to give podcasting a try, and I created the Access Blockbuster pod. I went about 5 episodes, actually. You can find the links in the description below, but, I got busy, things got busy, we started the channel, and here we are. It's currently December 2020, what a year it's been, by the way, and I decided let's give it another shot. So if you're new to the Access Blockbusters channel, if you're finding this podcast on YouTube, then welcome. Please make sure to stop by, check out some videos, subscribe if you like the channel, give this video a like, and just share the podcast around if you are enjoying it so far. I mean, it's only been, a minute, but maybe you like it. I hope so. And as of the time of the recording of this podcast episode, I am currently working on trying to get it onto different platforms. I was able to get Access Blockbuster Pod onto different platforms. I believe it's on Spotify. You can check it out there. And I'm working on getting this on Spotify as well. But the platform that I'm going to be primarily using for this is Anchor, as in the ship Anchor. And so I think I'll provide some links in the description down below if you want to check out that version. But yeah, I'll be doing my best to let you guys know if there are any other places where you can find this podcast. So before we get into sort of the brunt of today's episode, I just wanted to give you guys a little bit of introduction on what this podcast is going to be, sort of the nature of what I'm going to be talking about and how I'm going to be talking about it. As you can probably tell if you've been watching some of my videos, this is a little bit more laid back. I'm just sitting in front of a microphone with some notes, and we're just going to be talking all things Marvel. The first question that some of you might have is, well, why didn't you start a Star Wars podcast or a movies podcast in general or a DC podcast? Why is it Marvel? To answer that question, well, first of all, I did start a movies podcast, the Access Blockbusters pod. I just got a little busy. That's basically the only reason I didn't start uploading after episode 5. But the reason that this is a Marvel podcast, as compared to other things like Star Wars and DC, is just because I feel the most qualified out of those mediums, I guess, to talk about Marvel as in-depth as I possibly can. I grew up on Marvel. The MCU has been a huge part of my life, and I genuinely feel like I could maybe competently host a podcast about Marvel. The other things I know I'm a huge fan of, I know a lot about, but I do think that there are, people who are more qualified to talk about it than me. And I'm not saying that there aren't more people qualified to talk about Marvel than me. Of course there are. I'm certainly not the most qualified. But I do think in my humble opinion, that I would be able to maybe ramble on for an hour or so about all things Marvel. So that's sort of the nature of this podcast. It's taking one of my favorite pop culture, sectors, and we're just going to talk about it. We're going to talk about all things Marvel. So the general structure of the podcast, and again, if you're not crazy about the title Marvel Mania, honestly, neither am I yet. Maybe it'll grow on me, maybe it'll grow on you. But yeah, please leave some comments down below. If you guys don't stick around for the podcast, I don't blame you. I completely understand. But I would like to take this time at the beginning, if you're still around, to ask for some feedback. Let me know what you guys want to see out of this podcast, and let me know generally what the structure of it, what you want it to be. I'm totally open to suggestions. This is totally fluid. I have no idea if I have even a fixed structure. And secondly, I do want it to be a little bit more interactive, because obviously right now it's just me. In the future, I'm open to finding co-hosts and finding guests and having people to talk about it on. But for now, in this pandemic era of movies, it's just me. And so hopefully you guys enjoy that. If not, well, I'm sorry. But, thanks for watching and thanks for listening, I guess. But yeah, I do want it to be a little bit more interactive. So if you guys are still listening, please drop some questions or comments in the comment section about anything Marvel related. I want to, start a segment on this podcast where I just take questions from you guys and talk about things that you guys want to talk about as it relates to Marvel. And specifically Marvel. If you drop a Star Wars question, I would be happy to respond to you in the comments. But again, this is a Marvel podcast, and so I want to keep it that way. So if you guys have any questions about things that come up in the world of the MCU, leave them in the comments of this podcast. And also you can go to my channel page and leave it in the general channel discussion page as well. And I just really want it to be an interactive thing, now that there are over 300 of you guys, which by the way, that is insane. Thank you guys so much for the support on the channel. It's been a crazy journey, and now we're here starting a podcast, a second podcast, I guess. But I do want it to be, very much an interactive thing. I don't want to just sit here and talk by myself about things that I think are interesting, but maybe you guys don't care about at all. So that's sort of where we are. As for today's episode and maybe episodes in the future, and I don't know necessarily how many episodes a month, how many episodes, I guess, once a week, once every other week. I still haven't decided that yet. That'll be TBD. But the way that I thought we would structure today's episode, since I didn't really ask for questions before, so this is going to be just sort of me talking about things in the world of Marvel, as things are beginning to ramp up with WandaVision coming out in just over a month, I think. So today we're going to be breaking down some of the littler pieces of news, that came out over the past week from the MCU. And then we're going to talk about a big topic for a little bit, with the whole HBO Max situation and how it's going to affect Disney Plus, and specifically how it's going to affect Black Widow. I think those are important questions that we should be talking about. And so that's why we're going to be talking about it here. And honestly, one of the reasons that I made this podcast in general, aside from the fact that I really wanted to make a podcast because it was extremely fun to do the first time, it just, again, ran out of time, but we're going to try it again, is because there's a lot of news that comes out. And while I love making the videos and while I love talking about things with you guys, it's just not feasible yet, at least, for me to be talking about every single piece of Marvel news that comes out. So that's why you'll see me posting some videos once in a while about, so MCU Phase 4 castings, and Oscar Isaac is Moon Knight, and Jamie Foxx is in Spider-Man 3. Sorry, can't talk. Competent podcast host over here. But so I would make those videos, and I would really want to make videos every time a piece of news came out. For example, spoiler alert for this podcast, Kate Bishop cast Haley Steinfeld. Haley Steinfeld cast as Kate Bishop. That's the proper way to say that. And so I really wanted to, take some time to discuss every bit of news that comes out. But unfortunately for me, and for, the channel, it takes a while to make the videos, and it just wasn't viable for me to talk about every single piece of news that came out, in video form at least. But now that we have a podcast, we can sort of have a weekly recap, where we talk about everything and anything that's happened in the world of Marvel over the past week. And so that's exactly what we're going to be doing today. I will do my best to leave timecode stamps. Is that how you say that? Timestamps? I guess timestamps in the description below. And you can check out where and when exactly we're talking about certain issues. But yeah, let's dive right into it. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is sort of a non-story, I think, in my opinion at least, but it's the fact that Zendaya was on Jimmy Kimmel Live the other day. And Jimmy Kimmel, being the good-natured, spirited host that he is, asked her about Spider-Man 3, which is a MCU project that I am so excited for. It is, in fact, one of my most anticipated movies of next year, if it comes out next year, we hope. And he asked her point blank, can you confirm? Well, I guess not point blank. It was sort of a clever way, but he eventually, explicitly asked, is Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield and Spider-Man 3, are they going to be 3 Spider-Men in Spider-Man 3? That's a mouthful. And Zendaya basically just said, I can neither confirm or deny. Okay, so people are on the internet saying, that means that there are, because she didn't say no, right? Well, maybe, maybe not. I think that these actors, right? Tom Holland, for as bad as he is at keeping secrets in the MCU, he, Zendaya, Jacob Batalon, whoever else is in Spider-Man 3, they know the MCU. They know that they need to keep secrets no matter what. And so if this is just a ploy to kind of throw us off the scent, then so be it. It's just them trying to have some fun with us and kind of mess with us. So I wouldn't necessarily take this as much of anything. But again, I don't think that this necessarily, debunks the theory that all 3 Spider-Men are going to be in this film. And so kind of going off that point, there was an alleged video that came from one of Sony's Latin American Instagram, I think, or Twitter profiles, one of their social media platforms, where basically it point blank said, who's your favorite Spider-Man? You know, you got Tobey Maguire, you got Andrew Garfield, you got Tom Holland. Who's your favorite Spider-Man? And then it said, well, you don't have to pick because with Marvel's Multiverse, there's going to be all three. And I was like, well, wait a second, though. So would Sony, I think the first question to ask is, would Sony leak something as big as this before even a trailer is dropped? I'm not entirely sure. I haven't done a ton of digging into the legitimacy of this video. I saw a little bit of it. But again, this doesn't necessarily strike me as the most legitimate thing. Although, again, I could be totally wrong. And I, again, haven't done a ton of digging into it myself. But it doesn't seem like the thing that Sony or even Kevin Feige would allow at this point in the game, right? They haven't even announced that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield are in the movie. And if this is the way that they want to announce it, that's kind of lame, don't you think? So I'm a little hesitant on that. People are saying, this is the evidence that did Sony just leak that all three Spider-Man are going to be in the movie? Maybe they did. It is entirely possible that they did, and that would be kind of crazy. And I am personally hoping to see that because I just think it would be insanely cool. At the same time, I just don't think we can take these two pieces of information as, I guess, as concrete evidence that this is going to happen. Could be totally wrong. You know, you can let me know what you guys think about that, but I just don't happen to think this is the evidence that we're looking for. Although, you know, I think it was officially confirmed by somebody at Marvel that we are going to be getting a Spider-Man 3 teaser at some point in December. It is December. So hopefully we'll be getting some sense of what the movie is about, or a title at the very least. I am putting my bet on Homesick. I think Spider-Man Homesick is a very good title to have, especially if he's on the run, or if he is even the multiverse. If he gets lost in the multiverse, Homesick is pretty applicable, but could be totally wrong about that. So that's sort of the first piece of news that I wanted to discuss. But probably the more important piece of news, I guess, to talk about that happened this past week is Hawkeye. So Hawkeye is filming currently in New York City, I think, and we got some casting news, and it's pretty exciting. First of all, drumroll please, I guess, as if anybody's surprised by this, Kate Bishop has been cast, and it's going to be none other than Haley Steinfeld. This was all something that we had been speculating for the longest time. In fact, we've been speculating this for so long, I don't even know if the rumor came first or if our speculation came first. But at any rate, Kate Bishop will be played by Haley Steinfeld. I think that's a great casting. But on top of that, they actually released a bunch more of the casting for the Hawkeye series. So just running through them really quickly, we got Vera Farmiga. We got, I'm going to mispronounce some names. I'm just not good at names. But we got, it looks like Fee, Tony Dalton, Alaqua Cox, and is it Zon McLaren? I'm really bad with names. But anyways, those are the people that have been added to the cast of Hawkeye. In addition, and this is, I think, the one that we want to talk about, aside from Haley Steinfeld, in addition to the big one, Lucky the Pizza Dog. No, I'm just kidding. In addition to Florence Pugh as Yelena Belova. Now, this is interesting. And it makes sense. I think it makes sense. You know, as soon as they announced this, I think a lot of us went, oh, I didn't expect that. But that makes sense. First of all, you know, Hawkeye and Black Widow obviously have been a dynamic duo in the MCU. Especially, you know, leading up to Endgame, where they literally were basically the duo that, you know, got the Soul Stone and saved the universe, right? One of the most important pieces in that whole time heist. And so bringing in another Black Widow is an interesting move. I think Black Widow and Hawkeye are sort of tied at the hip. And even if it's, you know, a Florence Pugh Yelena Black Widow and a Haley Steinfeld Kate Bishop Hawkeye, I think that's, you know, they're still going to be tied together at some point or somehow. So I think this makes sense. I think that the inclusion of Yelena in this, and again, I don't know what the series is going to be about. We've barely seen anything, you know. There are pictures that seem to suggest that Hawkeye would be wearing a hearing aid, which takes from a storyline in the comics, where I think he loses his hearing, which might be an interesting thing. But again, you know, maybe, I don't know, maybe that's why he recruits Haley Steinfeld's Kate Bishop, because he's getting old. I don't know. But the inclusion of Yelena is really interesting, I think. It does seem to indicate that Yelena is going to have a very big role in the MCU moving forward. I don't think that's any surprise to anybody. Florence Pugh is one of the best actresses working right now in Hollywood, and I think that including her in as many things as possible is going to be a good thing. I think we got to be prepared, and this is a good thing again, to have Florence Pugh be one of the faces of the MCU moving forward, and I'm excited for that personally. We haven't seen Black Widow, obviously, but I think this is good news. And on top of that, we got a couple familiar names. Vera Farmiga is one of the best actresses. She does a lot of great work, and I'm really excited for that. And Tony Dalton is another really interesting name. He's listed on Wikipedia as Hawkeye's former mentor, Jack somebody. That should be interesting. I think Kevin Feige, he did mention at Comic-Con that we were going to be exploring a lot of Hawkeye's, at least his time as Ronin, but I guess this confirmation seems to indicate we will be exploring his past as well. That makes sense. It is a Hawkeye solo series. So I'm personally not that surprised by that as well. Again, just some solid pieces of casting news and some concrete details. In this pandemic age, where all these things got delayed and couldn't get released. Think about it. We would be getting WandaVision in maybe a couple weeks in a normal 2020, and we would have gotten, Black Widow, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Eternals by now. But at any rate, what's so impressive to me is that Marvel has decided to just keep going, and they've been safe about it as well. Shang-Chi wrapped filming, and I think they were filming for many days, few weeks, and they had 0 COVID cases. That's impressive to me. And so the fact that Marvel is showing they can still film these things and they will still be filming these things is a testament to the fact that Kevin Feige still believes in his plan. And it's just a matter at this point of when they're going to release it. Because think about it, right? Black Widow's in the can. Falcon and the Winter Soldier is in the can. The Eternals is in the can. That's not going to be released for another year. But it's done, as far as I know. Shang-Chi is wrapped filming. What else is there? WandaVision, of course, is wrapped filming. Loki, I believe Season 1 is wrapped filming. I think there were even reports that they were going to be heading into Season 2 soon. Obviously, Hawkeye just started. They cast Ms. Marvel, Moon Knight, She-Hulk. What If, I think, has been done for quite a while. Thor Love and Thunder is about to get started. Black Panther 2 is going to get started in July, allegedly. So Marvel's still moving, and they're not waiting for the world to catch up, which is, a bold thing to do in this current age that we are living in. It's just a matter of when are they going to release it. And we'll get to that in just a second with the big sort of hot button issue of today's episode of the podcast. But anyways, good news all around. Yes, Lucky the Pizza Dog is here to probably save the universe from Thanos again. I don't know. But Hawkeye has, been filming, and that's great. So we got also Spider-Man 3 filming at the same time. I believe Doctor Strange 2 is going to be filming at the same time. So we got some interesting things to look forward to, I guess, in terms of set photos and set videos. And speaking of Doctor Strange 2, Elizabeth Olsen is heading over there, and she is going to be filming for Doctor Strange 2. She's probably going to be the villain, I would suspect. I made a video about that as Doctor Strange sort of being an antagonist in WandaVision. I don't know that, but, just some speculation. But that leads us to WandaVision. So this isn't really news, but they released a couple posters, and looks like they're going to be releasing a series of posters where they just sort of change the era. Like they changed the TV, they changed the picture. So, typical WandaVision where they're going through the ages of sitcoms. But I just wanted to reiterate again that if all else fails, right, no matter how this pandemic goes for the next few months, WandaVision is still coming. It will be coming on January 15th. And that's exciting. 2020, first year since 2009, where there has been no Marvel content. And that's, disappointing to us all, but it is coming back. And if 2021 hopefully goes a fraction of the way that we hope it does, we are going to be getting a lot of Marvel content over the next year. So WandaVision is kicking things off in 2021. For those of you who don't know, I am insanely excited for WandaVision. I believe it is my second most anticipated project from Phase 4 and Phase 5, Spider-Man 3 being the first. And so I'm just so excited to see what this is going to do. Obviously, we know, or we think at least, that Wanda is going to be opening up the multiverse, and that is a really interesting thing for the MCU moving forward. I believe that, the Infinity Saga was obviously the Infinity Saga because of the Infinity Gauntlet and Thanos. And I do believe that when it's all said and done, whether it's Phase 6, 7, 5, I don't know, maybe Phase 8 even. But when this next saga is all said and done, I do believe that it will be called something like the Multiverse Saga, which I'm totally fine with. I'm totally down for a bunch of multiverse-centric films. And I think that that's going to be a really interesting direction for Marvel to take. But at any rate, we'll talk a little bit more about WandaVision, I guess, as we get closer. Maybe, if I do make an episode of this podcast right before WandaVision comes out, we will do an episode on some WandaVision theories and just what people are thinking, what I'm thinking, and sort of get a feel for how we are all thinking about this show. I have a feeling that this show is going to be something insanely incredible, but we'll just have to wait and see. All right, so it's about 21 minutes into the podcast, and at this point, if you're still here, thank you so much for listening. Please, again, take some time to go to the comments and let me know what you guys think about the podcast. You can leave your thoughts and questions down below in the comments, or you can email me directly at accessblockbusters@gmail.com. Again, just a reminder to smash that subscribe button. It would really mean a lot to me. This podcast and this channel have, been really great ways to let out my creative side during this crazy time, and I've been loving every second of it. So thank you guys so much for your support. And let's talk about the title of this episode. What happens to Black Widow in light of the whole HBO Max situation? So yeah, we got some astronomical news the other day about HBO Max and sort of what it would do in terms of 2021 and its releases for theaters. And I'm going to be talking a little bit. So this, the beginning part of this isn't necessarily Marvel related per se, but I'm just going to be giving some background on the issue and what I think about the issue as a whole. And then we will, of course, talk about how it relates to Black Widow. So for those of you who don't know what's been going on, HBO Max is the streaming service that is owned by Warner Brothers. It is the Disney Plus equivalent for Disney, but for Warner Brothers. They got things like The Dark Knight on there, Lovecraft Country, all those sorts of things. All the DC properties presumably are going on there. And so it was announced a little bit ago that Wonder Woman 1984 would be hitting theaters on December 25th on Christmas as planned, after a few delays obviously, but as planned. But it would also be heading to HBO Max on the same day. So obviously that's monumental news, right? That's, for a movie as big as Wonder Woman 1984, that is huge for the movie industry as a whole. And we had reason to believe, I guess, that this was the sort of thing that would be happening more and more frequently, maybe even just past Warner Brothers, for Disney, Lionsgate. Do they have a streaming service? I'm not sure, but Universal, all those sorts of things, right? So, that was sort of all in the air, all speculation, but we really didn't know what to think about it until this past week. So this past week, for those of you who don't know, Warner Brothers officially announced that they would be moving every single one of their major releases. And it might not even just be major releases. It might be every single film that they're releasing in theaters in 2021. They are going to be following that same model that they are with Wonder Woman 1984. And they're going to be moving them onto streaming, onto HBO Max, the same day that they're going to be hitting theaters. And obviously, this was a big deal, right? A lot of people had a lot of thoughts about this, including myself. I had a lot of thoughts about this issue. And I wanted to make a video about it, but I also wanted to wait and sort of think about what I thought about it. And I thought this podcast would sort of be the best time and the best place, I guess, for me to really dissect my thoughts and share with you guys what I'm thinking about this whole issue as a whole. So let's just, Black Widow and Disney aside, let's just talk about HBO Max. I've been watching and listening to a lot of pundits and a lot of critics and reviewers and hearing their thoughts on the issue. And, it's ranging from, this is actually going to be a good thing. This is a good way to transition away from into streaming, which is something that has been, foreshadowed for a long time. Other people seem to think this is a horrible thing. This is the death of the movie theater. So where do I stand on this? Well, it's obviously much more complicated than having just one particular stance. But I will say this, and obviously I am not I am not an insider, let's say. I am not, I don't have insider information on all of these things. I don't have numbers. I don't have stats. I am only looking at the same things that you guys are looking at, right? So I'm just thinking about this given the information that I have and that I've heard. From what I've seen, and I am totally open to being wrong about this, I've reached out to people and asked what they've thought about this, heard their thoughts. I am open to being completely wrong about this because I probably am somewhere, It's just the nature of not knowing all the information. I happen to think, though, that this is the best move that could have happened for theaters and for studios at this point in time, at the very least. There's a lot of nuances to talk about, and we will talk about them. But just if you wanted a blanket statement, that's what I happen to think. Again, if I am, missing some vital piece of information as we go along, then please let me know. Please send me some links to things. I've been doing a lot of reading and, processing of my own, but I definitely could have missed something. But, we'll talk about it. That's what we're here to do. So we'll talk about this. So, okay. HBO Max, for those of you who aren't aware, is the streaming service. Obviously, I mentioned that before, but it costs $15 a month. Fine. Streaming services are expensive. $15 a month for, the Warner Brothers catalog. That is what it is. So with this strategy of moving Wonder Woman 1984 onto HBO Max, it basically incentivizes people like me who don't actually have HBO Max to get on HBO Max and watch Wonder Woman 1984. And presumably, so now that Wonder Woman 1984 is on there, you look at the movies that are coming out next year, right? You saw Dune, you saw The Suicide Squad, Godzilla vs. Kong, Tom and Jerry, Matrix 4, right? I'm not entirely sure if a movie is coming out every month. I would presume so, right? And so, there is incentive now because normally you would have thought, okay, maybe get HBO Max once, cancel it, we're done. But now there's incentive for people to just keep HBO Max for the whole year. And that's smart of them. That is, a good thing, a good strategy, right? But we got to take into account the theaters, right? And that's where a lot of people are saying, well, it's going to be, the theaters are going to die. I do have some thoughts about that. And just sort of some basic preliminary thinking. But here's sort of where I'm coming from. I think that there are three possibilities, right? At this point in time, for a film as big as Wonder Woman 1984, there were only three possibilities. One being keep the movie as it is in theaters and nothing else. Just like they did with Tenet, just keep it in theaters and don't do anything else. Fine, That's option number one. I'm not going to give my thoughts on it just yet, just going to list out the options for you. Option number two would have been some sort of modified release, just like what they did. So this is what they did was option two, a modified release where they released it on streaming and in theaters at the same time. Option number three is to push it back. Honestly, I don't see many other alternatives to this. I think these sort of cover the big alternatives and options that Warner Brothers had for this movie, and Disney has with Black Widow, for example. But especially, Wonder Woman 1984 being a release in Christmas where the pandemic is still, terrible. And the country is in a really bad state with the cases. So these are the three options that Warner Brothers had. Let's kind of go through each option and sort of see why they wouldn't be viable. Option number one, keeping it in theaters as is. I think the clear answer to this, why didn't they do this, is because Warner Brothers wouldn't be making as much money releasing a film like Wonder Woman 1984 just in theaters and then getting it on HBO Max, right? This is more about HBO Max and Warner Brothers in this case, not about the theaters. The theaters would be making presumably, a bit of money for sure. They would be taking a lot of money, but relatively speaking, at least. But this is about Warner Brothers, they need to make some profit as well. So let's skip over option two because that is what they went with. And let's go to option three, pushing it back. If you want to talk about the death of the movie theater, continuing to push these movies back is probably the worst thing that could be done right now. The more that these movies get pushed back, because I've said this over and over again to people that I know, movie theaters being or the business, I guess, of movie theaters doing poorly right now is not a good thing, right? And you could say, well, it's because people don't think it's safe to go, and that is almost certainly a causal factor for why people are not going to the movie theaters. But I also think that there is sort of a comparative, or I guess another factor that works in conjunction with the fact that people don't think it's safe, and that is that there aren't big movies in theaters, right? I mean, yes, if I thought it was completely safe to go to a theater right now, would I go to a theater to see a movie that I hadn't even heard of before, right? I think that's the thinking of a lot of people, right? You continue to move films like Black Widow, like Wonder Woman 84. You keep pushing them backwards. People don't go to the theaters, right? Because there aren't big movies. You saw what happened when Tenet came out. It did not great, but relatively okay because it is a big movie. Obviously in America it didn't do great at all, but relatively speaking compared to the other movies, it did a lot better. And you have to understand that these theaters, obviously, the more movies that come in are the better, right? With the indie movies and the Oscar movies, but it's the blockbusters. It's the Avengers Endgames. It's Spider-Man Far From Home. It's Batman v Supermans. Captain Marvel's, Wonder Woman's. It's the Star Wars Force Awakens, Rise of Skywalker. It's those movies that bring in a lot of money for the theaters, right? Because the theaters take a cut of what the movie makes. So the bigger the movie that goes into theaters, the better it is for theaters, right? And presumably the better it is for the studio. So if by pushing these movies back continually, you might say, well, this streaming move is going to kill theaters, but I would argue that actually just pushing it back would be even more harmful to theaters than by doing the streaming move. Now, let's talk about the move to put it on streaming and in theaters on the same day. Let's talk about sort of this overall issue of, are theaters dying? I think the answer to that question before the pandemic was honestly yes. You weren't seeing signs of it necessarily, but I think there was a future, an inevitable future, if you will, where theaters were not going to be as prominent. I think that was just unavoidable. Because, the move to streaming and with how big Disney Plus was getting to begin with, and Netflix and HBO Max and Apple TV Plus even, I think the move to streaming was going to happen eventually. And so while you can say that this puts the nail in the coffin, certainly, and that's a different argument that I'm not necessarily going to address right now, I don't think that this caused movie theaters to die necessarily. I just wanted to get that out of the way. Now, looking at this move to put it on streaming and theaters at the same time, yes, obviously theaters would make a lot more money if they didn't do this and they just put it in theaters, obviously, right? But you have to look at it from both sides. The studios would also be making less money than if they put it on streaming. Like, certainly if people like me am considering seriously getting HBO Max and, canceling it at some point, but getting HBO Max to see Wonder Woman 84, right? And put a review out, obviously, but most people aren't reviewing it just to see Wonder Woman 84. It's a big deal, right? And so by doing this, Warner Brothers makes money, but also the theaters do. I see this as sort of a compromise, right? A way for both the theaters and, the theaters wouldn't make money if the studios pushed it back. The studios wouldn't have made money. They would have made some money, obviously, but not as much if they had just kept it in theaters. So they decide, the studios decide to do this dual streaming thing. Now, if you guys know, not HBO, AMC got really upset at this. They said, well, we hate this idea and we're going to fight back on this. That's a whole different issue again, because AMC made some questionable decisions with Universal earlier. Bottom line is, I feel like a lot of that anger was coming from the fact that you should have just put it in theaters and we would have made more money. True. That's not what I'm disputing here, because, if you've been listening to my rambling argument, but if you've been listening, it is true. If they had not done the streaming thing and just put it in theaters, certainly, the theaters would have made more money. I just happen to think that there is an alternative where the studio just says, we're going to just push it back even further. Especially with the state of the virus right now. Now, looking at sort of the move as a whole, one of the things that was interesting is that they decided to move their entire 2021 slate onto streaming. I would have thought, okay, we might take this on a case-by-case basis, say maybe the first 6 months until June, right? Because nobody knows when the vaccine's coming. Nobody knows when we're going to get back to normal. But all of 2021 feels a little bit interesting. And people have said, does this indicate that this is going to be a permanent move, or do you think that this is going to be a one-year thing? I personally happen to believe that this is still going to be a one-year thing, and here's why. Let's look at it this way. Obviously, by putting these movies on HBO Max, right, you are going to make a ton more money through HBO Max in this pandemic age, right? You're going to get a ton more subscribers. I can guarantee you that right now. And obviously that $14 a month is a huge deal. It's a huge deal. However, I want to caution people in thinking about just that, because the theaters, they do take a large cut of the movie. Let's not kid ourselves, right? A film like, for example, Black Widow, if it made $1 billion, it would only make about, I would think, 500 million in profit. Only 500 million, but only 500 million in profit, and that accounts for marketing, that accounts for production costs, and that accounts for the theater cut as well. So it's important to recognize as well that, let's just say you have a family of 4, right? It is expensive, by the way, to go and buy tickets nowadays. It's almost $15 a ticket in some places. So a family of 4 goes into the theater and pays $60 just for the movie, not even including concessions, right? $60. That same family can watch Wonder Woman 84 for $15, for 1/4 of the price. And granted, right, HBO and Warner Brothers gets the full $15, but it is so much less than if that family of 4 had gone to the theater. I would argue, right, there is a future in which, you have sort of a different model of releasing films. I'm not sure if it's going to be the same day they release it on streaming and in theaters, but there is going to be some potential to combine the profits of the theater and of streaming. Now, some people have said, there is just a future. The only future is where it goes on streaming and theaters at the same time, and theaters just sort of become a niche thing. I can totally see that, and I have some different opinions about that as well. But again, I don't think that theaters are necessarily going to be as irrelevant as people think, because I think there is still a lot of profit to be made there. And so while I do think it's curious that Warner Brothers is using this strategy for 2021, all of it, I don't necessarily think that this necessarily is a sign that they're going to use it for, forever and ever. I think that that's a possibility, but again, I'm not entirely sure. Okay, so I've talked a lot about HBO Max and that move for Warner Brothers as a whole. Again, I think it is probably one of the better things that could have been done for theaters and streaming right now, at least. We can talk about the future and what that means for the future of theaters, but at least for right now, I do think that this is the best thing that could have been done. But let's talk about what it means, because this is Marvel Mania. Let's talk about what that means for Black Widow. So, and by the way, I want to preface this by saying that there are rumors going around, and this is sort of why I wanted to start off this podcast with, this podcast series, hopefully, with this issue, because there are rumors that there will be, well, this is not a rumor, this is a fact, that there will be an investors meeting for Disney on Thursday, December 10th, 2020, and it will be announced that Black Widow will be heading to streaming in some capacity. Whether or not that is the same day streaming, same day theater thing, whether or not they're going to push it up into February and just release it on Disney Plus, I don't know. I would have to imagine it has to be after WandaVision is done, right? Which is, I think, early March. So, they wouldn't be moving it up that much, right? But at any rate, I'm not entirely sure what the nature of this is, if it's even true. But, just to prepare you guys, if this happens, and we will, of course, talk about this next podcast if this happens. And I will be probably making a video about this as well. But this is something that we do have to prepare for. So let's talk about it. So does this HBO Max move from Warner Brothers, does this mean that Black Widow is heading to Disney Plus? Honestly, I'm not entirely sure that this move affected Disney's plans in any significant way. I do think that, Kevin Feige over there, right? He is one who doesn't deviate from his plans very often for good reason, right? He is, very prudent, and it has come to profit Disney and Marvel greatly over the past 10, 11 years, right? He sticks to his plans, and if he has to change them, so be it, but he will do his best to stick to a plan. And so I get that this is above his pay grade a little bit, but I have to imagine that he has some input, and I don't think that this would have caused him or anybody at Disney to panic necessarily. However, I do think that, if I had to bet anything, over under 50% that Black Widow is going on Disney Plus, I would take the over, because I think there are a couple of reasons for this, right? Again, we don't know the reasons that Disney is contemplating, but we can speculate. And I think that there are a couple key reasons that are going into this decision if it is to be made. So number one, I think, is just the MCU in general. I think this is more of a Kevin Feige move. WandaVision is coming in January, on January 15th. And unlike DC, honestly, which is a little bit more standalone, right? Wonder Woman 84 doesn't affect the Suicide Squad at all, presumably, at least. I don't know that, but presumably. WandaVision, though, is tying into just about everything, or at least a lot of things in the MCU. And if you put WandaVision out on January 15th, and it's going to be 6 episodes, it's going to end, I think, early March, that's basically going to get the ball rolling for the MCU. People ask, why don't you just release Falcon and Winter Soldier earlier other than reshoots and stuff? And why don't you just release WandaVision earlier? It's because once you get one piece of this puzzle going, once you let the first domino fall, everything else has to start falling, right? You got to start releasing everything in order, because if WandaVision is released, and it's going to tie directly into Doctor Strange 2, if WandaVision is released and the pandemic, something gets worse, or they're not able to release Doctor Strange 2 in like 2 or 3 years, God forbid, then it's not going to have been worth anything, because no one's going to remember anything that happened in WandaVision. You want things to remain relevant, right? So what WandaVision releasing in January tells me is that they are getting the MCU moving, whether or not the world is going to be moving at that point as well. And obviously, WandaVision doesn't affect anything because it is a TV show, and you could just watch it at home. Not a big deal, right? The pandemic doesn't affect that at all. But these shows, right, are connected to the movies in some capacity. Just like WandaVision, Doctor Strange 2, I think Black Widow and Falcon and Winter Soldier are connected somehow with Thunderbolt Ross. So there is, some connections between the movies, and it's the movies that are really the big focal point at this point. So let's look at Black Widow. It's coming out in May, right? And not to get too political or anything, but, just talking about the coronavirus, which is affecting literally everything. This is a big deal because in May, we're not even sure what the state of the world is going to be. Even the most optimistic analysts are saying that it's probably not going to be the normal, close to normal, not even close to normal by May. It'll be better, I hope. But we're not going to be at the point where Black Widow could make $1 billion in theaters in May. So by getting WandaVision started now, it's telling me that Feige is saying, look, we gotta start moving on projects like Black Widow. Obviously, money is important, right? But the longer they sit on a film like Black Widow, the less and less relevant it's going to be. You say now, right? Oh, well, it could come out in 5 years and I'm still going to be interested and still going to watch it. I mean, A, is that even true? Are you going to be excited? I probably still will be in 5 years, 10 years, or whatever. But B, for the general audience, are they going to care? Is this going to be relevant? I think the answer is that while a lot of people would still watch Black Widow, it won't necessarily be as relevant as it was before. And so they gotta keep they gotta start the ball rolling, right? Again, the longer they delay the MCU as a whole, the less relevant it becomes. So I think the incentive is, look, I don't see a future in which Marvel delays Black Widow past May 2021, no matter what the state of the world is. And I'm not saying that means they were going to release it in theaters no matter what. I'm saying they're going to release it, period. And I think that if these rumors are true, that Black Widow is going to be announced to be going to Disney Plus in some capacity, and I suspect that there will be some theatrical thing. Like, I suspect it's going to be some, maybe it's going to be something like, oh, it's going to be released in theaters and then like 2 weeks later it's going to Disney Plus, something like that, right? That's fine, whatever it may be. But I do think that they got to start the MCU going again. That's one of the biggest things that's got to happen. After that, you wait and you hope that everything is sort of back to okay by Shang-Chi in July, I believe. Hopefully by Eternals in November. But Black Widow is sort of the key, the litmus test, if you will. But while I don't think that this HBO Max move directly impacted Disney's decision to release Black Widow on streaming or whatever they're going to do, I think that they were probably thinking on a similar wavelength as Warner Brothers was. I think, look, by releasing on Black Widow on Disney Plus, there is no denying they're going to make a lot of money, and maybe even more money than if they released it at the theaters during the pandemic, because there are a lot of people who are not interested in The Mandalorian, but they are interested in the MCU, and they're holding off Disney Plus until the MCU gets going. WandaVision, Black Widow, all that sort of stuff, right? I do suspect that at this time, when a lot of people don't think it's safe to go to the theaters, releasing it on Black Widow is going to make them a lot of money. Not even close to $1 billion, not even close to $500 million in profit, right? But at this point, it's a lot about cutting their losses and just moving forward. I think that's the big thing with these sorts of moves, right? They, of course, could keep, pushing Black Widow further and further. They could keep pushing Wonder Woman further and further. But there is the theater side to the equation as well, but there's also the relevancy side to the equation, right? And I don't know this. I don't know that Black Widow is going to be headed to theaters at the same time. For all I know, they could be doing the Premier Access thing on Disney Plus, and hopefully it works better this time because, well, A, I thought Mulan was an awful film, but that was just me. But B, from what I've heard, it didn't do as well as they hoped. So I'm not entirely sure if the Premier Access thing works. Maybe just make it $15 instead of $30. I don't know. That's a completely different discussion for, an analyst, an economic analyst. But again, there is, I would hope that the theaters are taken into account with this Black Widow move, because, you can have this discussion of our theaters dying with the HBO Max move. You can have that discussion. But again, I would make the argument that no, I think this move is going to be beneficial for both in some capacity, because they are going to theaters and going to streaming. If Black Widow just goes to streaming, we have a different story altogether. That is a completely different issue, and we will talk about that because that is different than if it's going to theaters and streaming. I would hope that there is some theater element to it, but again, I don't have any insider information on that. So we will have to see we'll have to wait and see until December 10th. I suspect that this report is true. I have no evidence to back that up. I just happen to think that, look, it's 2020. 2020 is almost over, but 2021, at least the first half, doesn't look like it's going to be much better than 2020. The movie industry is dying. Like, let's face it, right? As it is, if things keep going the way that they are, the movie industry is not on its last legs, but it is, running out of breath. It is, the adrenaline is pumping. The studios and the theaters, they're worried. Things got to happen, right? Things got to move in such a way to where we at least move forward. And I can say this now, obviously not knowing any of the analytical numbers, not knowing any of the money figures that come into this and on all that sort of stuff. But again, it's just important to know that relevancy matters too. And I could be totally ignorant in saying that, but I do believe that, Black Widow, based on this HBO Max move, I don't think so, but Black Widow will be going to Disney Plus. And I think in talking about, because I apologize, I spent a lot of time talking about the HBO Max thing, but I think it's important to compare, right? the ramifications of an HBO of a Wonder Woman 1984 moving to HBO Max as compared to a Black Widow moving to Disney Plus. You're going to see, the streaming platforms rise. That is something that's going to be happening regardless of what's happening with coronavirus and what's happening with the movie theaters. But you also have to understand that I think Warner Brothers is doing what they can to help the theaters. I don't know that. AMC certainly doesn't think so. And I think that Disney will do the same. I think that at the end of the day, you can make all the profit in the world, maybe not all the profit in the world, but you can make a lot of profit from Disney Plus and your streaming services. But I also think that the theaters are lucrative as well. I think that there is something to be said about keeping the theaters, not just for the experience, because I love the theater experience. I miss the theaters badly, but also just for economic reasons as well. I think that if you can have Disney, right, making tons of money, because think about it this way. This is sort of the last thing that we'll talk about, and then we'll wrap up the show. Think about it this way. Disney Plus has, I believe it's 170 million subscribers already, or some crazy number. I'm not sure if that's the right number, but some crazy number of subscribers already in the first year. They released basically one big piece of original content, The Mandalorian. It's not even a movie, right? They released one piece of original content, and they have already crushed the early projections, right? That people had for them. They didn't even have to release any films. They didn't even have to move any films onto their platform, because HBO Max does not nearly have as many subscribers as Disney Plus does, right? And so part of the reason that they're making this move, it's smart, is to try to get their numbers up to compete with Disney Plus. Disney doesn't have to do that. Think of a world in which Disney Plus is making tons and tons of profit, more than HBO Max is, with their films being on there, and then Disney can also make profit with their films in theaters. It may very well end up being a case-by-case scenario where each studio decides to do a different thing. And who knows, maybe Disney will single-handedly save the movie theaters. I don't know that. But again, there's a lot of things that you just can't rule out at this point. And to be quite honest with you guys, obviously the name of the game in 2020 is that we can't predict anything that's going to happen. But what I do think is going to happen is that this natural decline of theaters was always meant to happen. I think streaming is going to eventually take over, as sad as that is, whether it's in 10 years, whether it's next year, whether it's in 50 years, 100 years, it's going to happen. The question is, did this move, and will this move for Disney Plus, if Black Widow goes there, will this be it for the theaters? Again, I happen to think no. I could be completely wrong about that, but we'll have to wait and see what happens there. And that about does it for this first episode of the podcast. If you're still here, if you are still here listening, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. And again, I don't want this show. Honestly, I would I would much rather have this show be me talking maybe about half an hour rather than 50 minutes by myself. Not by myself, but about just random things that I came up with. So please, if you're still here, leave some comments and questions about anything MCU related. We'll do sort of an MCU mailbag, maybe a Marvel mailbag is the segment that we'll call it. And we'll spend some time each show doing that sort of thing. But again, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Give this video a like on YouTube. I'm working again on putting this up on Spotify, maybe Apple Podcasts. It's going to be on Anchor. I will leave that link in the description down below. And again, if you guys don't like this, then maybe we won't do it anymore, because, I have fun doing this, but if you guys don't want to do it, then I can just spend this time making videos, and that's totally fine as well. But I would just appreciate some feedback. Leave some comments down below what you thought about the podcast, and leave some questions, all that good stuff. Email me at accessblockbusters@gmail.com with any thoughts, comments, questions, concerns, criticisms, anything goes. But yeah, please make sure, everybody, to stay safe. The world is crazy right now, not just for movies, but for everything in general. And hopefully we'll be back to normal at some point next year, and we'll be able to enjoy films like Black Widow and Shang-Chi, The Eternals in theaters. And of course, Spider-Man 3. That's the big one. But yeah, guys, if you did enjoy, then please make sure to let me know. If you didn't enjoy, also let me know. And that'll be about it for this episode of Marvel Mania. Thanks so much for listening, guys, and I'll see you next time.